Corporal Thomas Parker has just said President Lincoln is dead, murdered. We cannot realize that our president is dead. May God help his family and our distracted country. Elijah Hunt Rhodes.
I have been expecting this. I am stunned, as by a fearful personal calamity. Though I can see that this thing occurring just at this time may be overruled to our great good. We shall appreciate him at last. George Templeton Strong.
On the avenue in front of the White House were several hundred colored people, mostly women and children, weeping and wailing their loss. This crowd did not diminish through the whole of that cold, wet day. They seemed not to know what was to be their fate, since their great benefactor was dead. And those strong and brave men wept when I met them. The hopeless grief of those poor colored people affected me more than almost anything else. Gideon Wells.
Lincoln's casket lay in state, first in the East Room of the White House, then in the rotunda of the Capitol. He was to be buried in Springfield, Illinois, his adopted home. The small coffin of his son Willie, who had died in Washington, was disinterred to make the journey with him. Mary Lincoln was too overcome with grief to go. The funeral train took 12 days and traveled 1,662 miles through the soft spring landscape, retracing the route Lincoln had taken to Washington 4 years earlier. In Philadelphia, Lincoln's coffin lay in Independence Hall, where he had declared he would rather be assassinated than surrender the principles embodied in the Declaration of Independence. In New York, the procession took 4 hours. Scalpers sold choice window positions along the route for $4 and up. From his grandfather's window, a young Theodore Roosevelt watched the procession pass. At Cleveland, 10,000 mourners passed through a specially built outdoor pavilion every hour, all day, despite a driving rain. It ended in Springfield on May 4th. The coffin rode to the Illinois State House in a magnificent black and silver hearse borrowed from St. Louis, and lay open in the chamber of the House of Representatives, where Lincoln had warned that a house divided against itself cannot stand. Among the thousands of people who shuffled past his coffin were many who had known him in the old days. Farmers from New Salem, law clients and rival attorneys, neighbors who had nodded to him each morning on his way to work. Sarah, the president's stepmother, had had a premonition when Lincoln left for Washington 4 years before. "I felt it in my heart that something would happen to him," she said, "and that I should see him no more." General Joseph Hooker led the final slow march to Oak Ridge Cemetery through a gentle spring rain.
You, white white people are the children of Abraham Lincoln. We are at best only his stepchildren. Viewed from the genuine abolition ground, Mr. Lincoln seemed tardy, cold, dull, indifferent. But measuring him by the sentiment of his country, a sentiment he was bound as a statesman to consult, he was swift, zealous, radical, and determined. Taking him all in all, measuring the tremendous magnitude of the work before him, considering the necessary means to ends, infinite wisdom has seldom sent any man into the world better fitted for his mission than Abraham Lincoln. Frederick Douglass.
On April 26th, Union cavalry trapped John Wilkes Booth in a Virginia tobacco barn and set it afire. His accomplice, David Harold, surrendered. Booth preferred death. The soldier shot him in the neck. At the end, he asked to have his hands raised, looked at them, and said, "Useless, useless." That day, in a farmhouse near Durham Station, North Carolina, Confederate General Joseph Johnston surrendered what was left of his army to William Tecumseh Sherman. Jefferson Davis, exhausted but still defiant, fled southward, hoping somehow to rally the Confederacy from Texas.
It may be that with a devoted band of cavalry, I can force my way across the Mississippi, and if nothing can be done there, then I can go to Mexico and have the world from which to choose a location.
On May 10th, at Irwinville, Georgia, Union cavalry caught up with him. With the arrest of its president, the Confederate government ceased to exist. Davis was sent north to Virginia under heavy guard. Northern newspapers spread the false rumor that Davis had been apprehended wearing women's clothes. North and South, he was reviled as the villain of the war.
These misconceptions about Davis are so strange that it's as if a gigantic conspiracy was launched. It was partly launched by Southerners who, having lost the war, did not want to blame it on their generals, so they blamed it on the politicians, and of course Davis was the chief politician. So it was the Southerners more than the Northerners who vilified Jefferson Davis. The Northerners wanted to hang him from a sour apple tree, but the Southerners really tore him down after the war.
Davis was imprisoned at Fortress Monroe in a cell kept perpetually lit and was made to wear chains, though he protested that those are orders for a slave, and no man with a soul in him would obey such orders.
Dear Verena, this is not the fate to which I invited you when the future was rose-colored for us both. But I know you will bear it even better than myself. And that of us two, I alone will ever look back reproachfully on my career.
Scattered fighting stuttered on in Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi, and even further west, where on May 13, 1865, Private John J. Williams of the 34th Indiana became the last man killed in the Civil War in a battle at Palmito Ranch, Texas. The final skirmish was a Confederate victory. On the morning of May 23, 1865, the American flag flew at full staff above the White House for the first time since Lincoln's death. U.S. Grant and the new president, Andrew Johnson, stood side by side to watch the grand armies of the Republic pass in review down Pennsylvania Avenue from the Capitol.
And so it came, this glorious old Army of the Potomac, for 6 hours marching past, 18 or 20 miles long, their colors telling their sad history. It was a strange feeling to be so intensely happy and triumphant, And yet,